My sister-in-law set a plate of lemon bars in front of me and smiled like she was doing me a favor. It was a Sunday. My mother-in-law had called it a family check-in, which I'd learned over the years was her way of gathering everyone together without explaining why. I showed up because I always showed up. That's the thing about being the person. Everyone assumes we'll be fine. You keep showing up even when something in the back of your neck is telling you not to. I'd been a registered nurse for 6 years by then. Night shifts, 12-hour rotations, the kind of job where you learn to read a room in about 4 seconds flat. You watch people's faces when they think no one's looking. You learn what panic looks like when it's trying to disguise itself as calm. It's saved lives before. That afternoon it saved mine. My husband passed away 14 months before that Sunday. Cardiac event. He was 38. We had 2 daughters. One was 4. One had just turned 7. The kind of ages where they still crawl into your bed at night and you let them because you need it as much as they do. His name was Patrick. I'm not going to pretend this story isn't about grief, because it is. It just isn't only about grief. Patrick's family had always been polite to me in that careful way that means nothing. His mother, I called her what the girls called her, Grandma Lorene, was pleasant at holidays and distant the rest of the year. His sister, who I'll call my sister-in-law because that's still what she is to me, had been my husband's closest friend growing up. She was the kind of woman who ran charity galas and sent birthday cards exactly 1 week early, and I had never once felt like she genuinely liked me. When Patrick died, his estate was straightforward. He'd updated his will 8 months before his death. We didn't know anything was coming. He just liked things in order. That was Patrick, and he'd left everything to me and the girls. The house, the savings, the small investment account his grandfather had started for him. He also named me executor of his estate. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was too busy trying to figure out how to explain death to a 4-year-old. So that Sunday I sat at Grandma Lorene's dining room table, with a lemon bar I wasn't going to eat, and I watched my sister-in-law refill everyone's coffee, and not look at me once. My phone buzzed. I assumed it was the hospital. I almost didn't look, but something made me, that same instinct, the one I'd trained for years, and I glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. The message was 6 words. Don't react. They're going to record you. I put the phone face down on my thigh. My heart was doing something loud and wrong inside my chest, but I kept my face completely still. 6 years of delivering bad news in calm voices. I knew how to do this. I picked up the lemon bar and took a bite. These are really good, Lorene, I said. Did you make them? She hadn't. My sister-in-law had. She said so and smiled at me for the first time that afternoon. I smiled back. On the inside, I was running every scenario I could think of. Who had that number? Who knew I was here today? What they meant by record. Whether there was a camera in this room or a phone propped against something, angled at the chair they'd put me in. The chair with the best light, I realized, the one facing the window. I shifted slightly so my back was more angled. I started talking about the girls' school. I asked Grandma Lorene about her garden. I stayed for 40 more minutes, and I did not check my phone again until I was sitting in my car with the doors locked. 3 more messages from the same number. Patrick's will is why. The house especially. She hired someone. I can't say more right now. Please be careful going home. I sat in that parking spot for a long time. I want to explain something about being a widow with 2 small children and a house in your name. People look at you differently than you expect. Some people are generous and kind and show up with food for months. But some people look at you like you're a problem that got solved wrong, like the outcome of a situation they'd had opinions about, and those opinions had been ignored. I had known, in a vague way, that Patrick's sister had expected to inherit something. Patrick had mentioned it once carefully, the way he mentioned things about his family, with a kind of protective editing, shielding me from the details. His grandfather's original money had passed down through the family, and his sister had assumed it would stay in the family in some specific way she'd decided on without telling anyone. It hadn't. Patrick had left it to his daughters, which was, I would argue, exactly where it belonged. I didn't know what she hired someone meant. I told myself I was overreacting. I went home, put the girls to bed, and sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my laptop, and tried to think like a person who knew what they were doing. I didn't feel like that person. I felt like a 31-year-old woman who was very tired and very alone, and had just gotten a warning from a stranger, and did not know what to do with it. What I did was call a locksmith the next morning. I'd been meaning to change the locks since we moved in. Patrick had always said he'd get around to it, and then he didn't, and then he was gone, and I'd never thought about it again until that night. The locksmith came at 9. I tipped him $20 and stood in my kitchen, feeling marginally safer. Then I called my friend Abby. She'd done a year of law school before switching to social work, and she knew more about legal things than I did, which wasn't a high bar. I didn't tell her everything. I told her I was named executor of Patrick's estate and asked if that could cause problems with his family. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "It can if they think they should have gotten more. Have they said anything?" "Not directly," I said. "Keep records of everything," she said. Emails, texts, voicemails, all of it. I started keeping records. 2 weeks after the family lunch, I came home from a night shift to find the side gate to my backyard unlatched. I always latched it. Both girls were at my mother's that night, which was the only reason I was calm enough to walk around the perimeter of the house instead of just going inside. Nothing looked disturbed. The windows were all locked. I told myself it was the wind and went to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling until my alarm went off. The week after that, my neighbor, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Okonkwo, who kept the most beautiful marigolds I have ever seen, knocked on my door and asked if I'd had any repair work done recently. I said no. She said a man had been parked on our street twice in the past 10 days. White sedan. He'd sat there for a while both times. She'd assumed he was waiting for someone, and then realized he kept looking at my house. I thanked her. I wrote down the date and what she'd told me, and put it in the folder I'd started on my laptop. Then I drove to an electronics store and spent $400. I could not entirely afford on a home security system with 4 cameras. The man at the store helped me figure out the angles: front door, back door, side gate, and the driveway. I installed them that evening while the girls were watching a movie, and I did not tell anyone I'd done it. That same night I finally texted back the unknown number. "Who are you?" The response came 12 minutes later. "I work with her. I don't want to be part of this. That's all I can say." I typed and deleted 4 responses before I sent. "Did you see anything specific?" "Enough to know you need to protect yourself and your kids." I asked if they'd be willing to meet or talk on the phone. They said no. I asked if they could tell me what I was protecting myself and my kids from. There was a long pause, longer than before, and then, "Custody. She thinks if she can show you're unfit, she gets the girls. She's been building a case." I read that message 3 times. Then I went into my daughter's room and watched them sleep for a while. My older one had her arm thrown over her little sister the way she always did, like she was making sure she was still there. I thought about Patrick. I thought about his sister, refilling coffee, not looking at me. I went back to my kitchen and I started making a list. Here is what I knew, once I allowed myself to know it. Patrick's sister had never had children of her own, though she'd spoken about wanting them. She had resources I didn't have. A husband with a stable income, a house twice the size of mine, connections in the community. She had been close to Patrick, and I think in her mind, when he died, she'd assumed something. Custody, or at minimum visitation rights so regular they'd feel like custody, would naturally fall to her. Nobody had told her that. Nobody owed her that. But she'd decided it anyway. And when the will was read and the house stayed with me, and the investment account went into a trust for the girls, something in her had shifted. She couldn't take the estate, but she could go after the girls. Not because she loved them, though maybe she did in her way, but because they were Patrick's. And she believed Patrick's things should belong to Patrick's blood, and she had decided she was more his blood than I was. I know this because of what I found later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The camera in my backyard went up on a Thursday. On Saturday morning, I reviewed the footage from the previous night and found 47 minutes of nothing, and then, at 2:14 a.m., a figure in dark clothing coming through my side gate. They walked to my back porch. They stood at the back door for about 30 seconds. I could see them trying the handle, and then they walked along the side of the house, and looked in the window of my laundry room, and then they left the same way they came in. I sat with that footage for a long time. I called the police. I filed a report. The officer who came out was kind and thorough and told me to make sure my locks were changed, which they were, and to keep the footage somewhere backed up, which I did. He said they'd increase patrols in the area. He took a copy of the recording. Then I called a family law attorney. Her name was Ms. Vasquez, and she had a small office above a dry cleaner on the east side of town, and she had been doing family law for 19 years. I sat across from her desk and told her everything, including the part about the unknown number, and the cameras and the figure in my backyard at 2 a.m., and she listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Has anyone filed anything yet?" "Not that I know of." "They will," she said. "It wasn't cruel, it was just information. You need to be ahead of it." We talked for an hour and a half. I took 6 pages of notes. I walked out of her office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not better, exactly, but oriented. Like I'd been wandering in a building, and someone had finally shown me the floor plan. The filing came 5 weeks later. My sister-in-law, through her attorney, petitioned for guardianship of both my daughters, on the grounds that I was, and I am quoting here, emotionally unstable, financially precarious, and unable to provide a stable home environment following the death of my husband. I sat in Ms. Vasquez's office and read the petition, and kept my face very still the way I'd learned to do. The supporting documents were thorough. There were affidavits from 2 people I didn't recognize. There were references to my erratic work schedule, my night shifts, as evidence of instability. There was a photograph, taken through my kitchen window, of me crying at my table. The timestamp says it was 3 weeks after Patrick died. I had been crying at my kitchen table 3 weeks after my husband died. They had submitted that as evidence. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stood over the sink for about 2 minutes. Then I washed my hands and went back out and told Ms. Vasquez to tell me what we needed. Here is what we had. We had my personnel file from the hospital, which showed 6 years of strong performance reviews and exactly 1 written note from 4 years ago for a scheduling mix-up that had been resolved without consequences. We had statements from my daughter's pediatrician, their teachers, the director of their after-school program, and Mrs. Okonkwo next door, who wrote 4 handwritten pages about my character and the state of my garden and the way my girls laughed when they came outside to help her with the marigolds. We had the security footage. We had the police report. We had the folder of texts from the unknown number, which Ms. Vasquez had her paralegal format properly, with timestamps. And we had something else. Something I hadn't expected. The person who'd texted me, I still don't know their full name, and I've made my peace with that, had taken a photograph. I don't know when, or exactly how, but they had documented a meeting. My sister-in-law and her attorney and a private investigator in a coffee shop, with a notepad in front of them that had my address on it and, below it, my older daughter's school name and dismissal time. They'd been planning to document my daily routine, to build a picture of a mother who wasn't present, who wasn't paying attention, who was too broken by grief to be trusted. What they had actually documented was themselves, planning to surveil a grieving widow and her children. Ms. Vasquez looked at that photograph for a long time. Then she said, "This is going to be fine." The hearing was on a Tuesday in March. It was a cold day. I wore the blazer I'd bought for Patrick's memorial service because it was the most professional thing I owned, and I sat next to Ms. Vasquez at a table, and across from us sat my sister-in-law with her attorney. And she was the one who didn't look at me this time. I noticed that. Ms. Vasquez had submitted everything. The judge, a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away, had reviewed the petition and our response, and the supporting materials. She asked clarifying questions. She was precise and unimpressed by performance. When my sister-in-law's attorney tried to characterize my night shifts as evidence of neglect, Ms. Vasquez asked the court to note that I had maintained consistent, documented childcare arrangements for every shift I'd worked since Patrick's death. That my daughter's school attendance was at 97%. And that their teachers had submitted statements describing them happy, well-adjusted, and clearly loved. When the attorney referenced my emotional instability, Miss Vasquez introduced the photograph of me crying and asked the court to consider the circumstances under which it had been taken. Through my kitchen window, without my knowledge, 3 weeks after I buried my husband. Then she submitted the security footage of someone entering my property at 2 a.m. and the police report that followed. The judge looked at the photograph. She looked at the footage. She looked at the petition. Then she looked at my sister-in-law. The petition was dismissed. The judge noted for the record that the methods used to gather evidence raised serious concerns, and that she was referring the matter to the state bar for review of the private investigator's conduct. She strongly encouraged all parties to consider the well-being of the minor children before initiating any further legal action. My sister-in-law left without looking at me. Her attorney looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. I sat in my chair until the room was almost empty, and then I put my face in my hands for about 30 seconds. Not crying, just breathing. Ms. Vasquez put her hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Mrs. Okonkwo brought me marigolds the following weekend. I told her some of what had happened, not all of it, but enough. She listened and then she said, "I knew something was wrong when that man kept sitting in his car. I know this street." She looked at me very directly. "You should know it too now." "I do. I know every car that belongs here. I know which neighbor walks their dog at 6 and which one gets deliveries on Thursdays. I know the sound the side gate makes when the wind catches it versus when someone is pushing it. I know all of it in a way I didn't before. And I'm not sure I'd trade that knowledge even though I wish I'd never had to learn it. My daughters don't know what happened. My older one asked me once why we had cameras on the house now, and I told her it was so I could always see that they were safe when I was at work. She accepted that completely. She went back to her drawing. The unknown number went silent after the hearing. I sent one final message. Just, "Thank you." There was no response. I don't expect there ever will be, and that's okay. There are plot holes in this story that I cannot fill in for you. And I want to be honest about that because I think you deserve it. I don't know exactly how deep the plan went. I don't know if Grandma Lorene knew, or if she was only someone my sister-in-law used for the setting. I have my suspicions, and I've chosen to leave them as suspicions, because my daughters love their grandmother, and I'm not going to take that from them over something I can't prove. What I know is this. Someone looked at me. A tired nurse working nights, raising 2 little girls alone, still wearing the same blazer she'd buried her husband in, and decided I was a problem they could manage. They thought grief made me soft. They thought I was too overwhelmed to notice, too exhausted to fight back. They had a private investigator photograph me crying in my own kitchen, and they lost. Patrick used to say I was the most organized person he'd ever met, which he meant as a compliment even when it made him a little crazy. The irony is that those 6 pages of notes I took in Ms. Vasquez's office, the folder on my laptop, the timestamps, the backed-up footage, all of it was just the same thing I'd been doing for 6 years, on the night shift. Paying attention. Writing things down, not assuming anything was fine until I could verify it. They forgot who they were dealing with, or maybe they never knew in the first place. My girls are doing well. My older one is in 2nd grade and has decided her future career is a scientist who also does gymnastics, which I fully support. My younger one still climbs into my bed some nights, and I still let her. The marigolds Mrs. Okonkwo gave me are in a pot by the front door, and every morning when I leave for work I look at them, and I think about everything that was almost taken from us. And then I lock the door, and I go take care of people. That part hasn't changed.